Hey everybody. As you know, a while back, I started my return journey to the Dark Tower, my first trip through the entire series proper in almost 20 years. In this video, I'm going to be talking about Book 3, The Wastelands. It was one that I did not have fond memories of from 20 years ago, and I did not rank it very high in my list of all Stephen King novels ranked from the 90s. So while I had some trepidation because I didn't have fond memories, I was also very curious and kind of excited to revisit it and see if it hit me different at this point in my life. So in this video, we're going to talk a bit about a summary of the work and also about what works and what didn't. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Book 3, The Wastelands. So, like I said, the first time around, I didn't really care for The Wastelands. And I think, at that point in my life, looking at it from this point in my life, I was probably just about the worst candidate to read the Dark Tower series, considering that it has so many elements of westerns and fantasy and you know dragons and swords and sorcery and all of the above. And at that point in my life, I was honestly pretty closed minded about stuff like that. So while book 2, the drawing of the three, I really enjoyed because it spends so much of its time in our world, and that fish out of water element of Roland in America still are just so funny to me and so entertaining and enjoyable. And from what I remembered about the Wastelands, it spends most of its time in Roland's world, which is perfectly fine and perfectly understandable because it's all about this group of people making this journey to the Dark Tower, which is in Roland's world. That's the whole point. But I found it to be off-putting, like held me at a distance, hard to get into, just because I couldn't get past the sort of fantasy aspects of it. Again, what the hell was I thinking? I mean, what was I expecting? It's kind of embarrassing to admit now, but one of the things that jumped out at me and surprised me revisiting the Wastelands is how much of it actually takes place in our world, or takes place in situations and settings that are very reminiscent of our world. So another thing that jumps out at me is that, because I've at this point I'm now on book 6, and I have taken a couple of diversions along the way. So thinking now about my experience reading The Wastelands or listening to The Wastelands, which was now a couple months in the past, is that it's really the last very streamlined and straightforward main novel in the series. In fact, it's only 20 pages longer, at least in my trade paperback edition. It's only 20 pages longer than The Drawing of the Three, which also is a very streamlined and efficient, at least in my opinion, work. So The Wastelands is another one. It's efficient. It gets in, it gets out. It doesn't overstay its welcome. In fact, um, a really compelling case could be made that it should stay longer than it does. But anyway, that's another thing that jumps out at me is that, especially in the beginning of book 4, just right out of the gate, the writing style is so much different. It's so much more descriptive. It's so much more kind of luxuriating and maybe overinflated. Book 4 is excellent, but it's almost kind of a jarring change. Drawing of the Three and the Wastelands are written; they have a very similar tone, and Book 4 is quite a bit different. But anyway, we'll cover that in a different video. So, at its heart, the Wastelands is not quite as streamlined in the journey as the Drawing of the Three, which literally saw Roland and the group, walk a ways up a beach, walk several miles up a beach. And that was about it. I mean, the Wastelands actually does take them farther, quite a bit farther. I'm trying to think if it takes them the farthest of any of the books in the series up to this point, and I can't recall. But it goes a long way toward actually getting them well on their way toward this thing that they're all now pursuing, that Roland is obsessed with, that they're all becoming obsessed with, the Dark Tower. So right out of the gate, that's kind of nice because it gets down to the business of actually getting them where they're supposed to go. So we pick up the story a couple months after the drawing of the three, and Roland and Eddie and Susanna are sort of hanging out in the woods. They're eating, they're traveling, they're getting strong, they're learning. Eddie and Susanna are learning the ways of gunslingers, and they kind of stumble upon the first big set piece of the Wastelands, one of the classic moments in the whole series, in my opinion. And that's when they discover a portal of the beam, as well as the beam guardian, a giant mechanical bear named Shardik. And the confrontation that they have to defeat Shardik, and just sort of Shardik in general, is really fascinating and sort of sets the stage for one of my new big takeaways from the Wastelands, which is just how fascinating all of the mechanics of mechanical things and inventions and technology of the old people really is. I would love there to be some sort of Dark Tower related novel that just takes place in the time of the old people and talks about all of that, because I think the mythology of the Dark Tower series is fascinating. So anyway, long story short, they find the path of the beam, and then something that I've always kind of struggled with, at least in my comprehension, um, I don't know if I'm just not smart enough to get it, but is the idea of time paradoxes. You know, if this thing and that thing, and like the Back to the Future series is full of these types of time paradoxes, and it's interesting, it's fascinating, but it can get very confusing. So the Wastelands features another a paradox, and luckily it's fairly straightforward. Although even so, it's still kind of, I just went along for the ride. I felt like I understood it. Usually with me, the closer I look at a paradox, the harder it is to see and understand. So I just kind of tried to coast along during that part of the novel. But so what we're dealing with is that at the end, so in book one, The Gunslinger, Roland meets Jake at the way station because Jake died in America and he ends up in Roland's world. Well, at the end of the drawing of the three, Roland takes the opportunity to change that destiny for Jake. And during the course of the first part of the Wastelands, he becomes sort of, he just almost like loses his mind completely because he has two identical, like two real valid sets of memories. One in which he met Jake and they did the thing and the whole scene under the mountain with the slow mutants and all of that, and another equally valid set of memories where Jake never existed, like Roland never met him. And on the flip side, Jake, once he passes the point when he died, and then in the Wastelands he doesn't, because of see, I'm gonna have a hard time even talking about it. Anyway, Jake and Roland are both plagued by competing valid real memories, feelings, thoughts, and it sets up this really fascinating process of getting Jake back into Roland's world. I won't um, I won't delve into that too much because I don't think I'd be able to explain it very well if I tried. But suffice it to say, in this part of the novel is the the second big set piece, and it involves getting Jake back into Roland's world via a house that turns out to be a monster, and a whole bunch of kind of magical doings on Roland's side. Long story short, Jake ends up back and all is well, and Roland's headaches go away, and the voices in his head stop screaming at him because he is once again whole and everything has been resolved. So that's the end of the first portion of the novel. And there's a huge buildup toward the epic set piece at the end of the novel. And in the middle is what I recalled as being the part of the novel that especially was draggy. And it wasn't so bad when I went back and did my recent reread. In fact, there's a lot to recommend this part of the book. So one of the most enduring and endearing characters in the entire Dark Tower series, perhaps even the entire Stephen King universe, Oi the Billy Bumbler, is first introduced. You immediately fall in love with Oi. He's so vivid, so I don't know, just so wonderful to imagine that he's one of those things, I don't know, like Butterbeer in the Harry Potter series, where it just seems so right and so familiar. Like, it must be a real thing. You must be able to go out into the world and get a glass of butterbeer, or you must be able to go to the pet store and buy a Billy Bumbler. But in fact, they do not exist. Oya is just one of my very favorite characters of all time, and it adds a really wonderful layer of, Roland feels sad because Jake, the position that Jake's in, having lost his life, not that he had a whole bunch that was, um, really tying him to New York. He's still a kid, and Roland feels bad for him that he'll be lonely and everything that would go along with his situation. And so Oi comes along, and it's a friend for Jake. It's very heartwarming. It's very endearing. And the quartet, along the way, they stop in a community called River Crossing, which is on the outskirts of the old people megalopolis, metropolis, magnificent monstrosity city that is Lud. And up to this point, there's been a lot of questions, not a lot of answers about what the heck is actually going on, what they're going to find when they get to the city on the horizon that looks so much in the distance like New York City. And I don't know, it's kind of it's handled organically, but it's one of those types of scenes that shows up in a lot of authors' work, but sometimes in Stephen King as well, where suddenly there's a group of people or one person or whatever that come into the main characters' lives and are just handily able to explain everything, sort of give some context, some background, some history, and while this is kind of obviously apparent, it's a tool, it's a device for Stephen King to kind of flesh out the world and what's going on. It actually also is handled very well and builds a lot of suspense and foreboding, foreshadowing for what they will encounter when they reach the city of Lud. And then the final large portion of the book takes place in the city of Lud. And this is another, oh my goodness, tour de force of imagination. And I would love if there was a standalone novel just about the city of Lud. Takes place in the time of the old people or not, after the old people, the war, whatever. Because it just immediately from the get-go, when they're trying to cross the dilapidated bridge to get into the city in the first place, and then when Eddie and Susanna are traveling through the street levels of Lud, and Roland is trying to find Jake, who's been abducted, and is like chasing him all through the bowels of the city. My imagination was just on fire. It was just on overdrive, and I enjoyed it so much. And I really would, even if there was decent fan fiction written about the city of Lud, I would read it, because I just enjoyed it so very much. And then finally, the group is able to leave the city of Lud by riding an insane monorail powered by something called slow trans engines, which is another thing that just sounds so right. It must be real, but come to find out, it's a figment of Stephen King's imagination, or at least it's not real in our world, and he has chosen this device to populate the old people's machinery in Roland's world. But anyway, they escape Lud, um, on Blaine the Mono, and dot 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 cliffhanger. So you would be totally forgiven for being livid with Stephen King for ending the Wastelands on a cliffhanger. Um, I I knew that it was coming, so it didn't really bother me all that much. However, I couldn't help but think about those readers who read the book in the early 90s, and it ends on a cliffhanger. And Stephen King had only been publishing a new Dark Tower novel every 4 to 5 years. So there's a cliffhanger, and God knows when we will actually pick up this story. But Stephen King, in his afterword, said, I I ran out of steam. The story ended for me. So rather than push on, he decided to end. And he acknowledges that a lot of people might be upset with him, but that was how he chose to do it. And of course, now it's a completely moot point because the second you finish the Wastelands, you can pick up Wizard and Glass and just carry on. But anyway, what works in the Wastelands? I've alluded to it, I've talked about it, but Lud, capital Lud, exclamation point. The city of Lud is magnificent. It's a marvel. It's nightmarish. It's truly like, I don't even know. Um, it's sad. It's kind of pathetic. There is so one of my, like, it totally seems to come out of left field, and it's so funny to me. There's an element of Lud, this thing called the God drums, which play periodically and drive one group of the city dwellers kind of, they're just cowering in fear of the machines in the city, and the drums happen, and it causes them to sacrifice members of their own group, which is really sad, and it's really, um, kind of pathetic until, I mean, it's sad and it's pathetic, but it's hilarious when Eddie recognizes the drums as being the beat from the ZZ Top song Velcro Fly. And I'm totally in the description. I will put a link to a brilliant video that someone created, about the God drums, where they have looped, I mean, they've created the God drums of Lud, basically based on the beat from Velcro Fly. And that's just one of many, up to this point, connections between Roland's world and our world, which start to make a whole heck of a lot more sense as the series wears on. But in the Wastelands, that just made me laugh out loud. Just this idea of people going crazy and killing themselves because of the drums from a ZZ Top song. Anyway, it's just icing on the cake for me in this entire, this brilliant imaginative set piece of Lud. As I mentioned, it is the last quote unquote simple Dark Tower book, the last relatively streamlined one. I found that very refreshing. That it really does go by at quite a nice clip, and it's completely different than I remembered it my first go round. You know, the most controversial aspect of the Wastelands is that notorious cliffhanger, but knowing that it's coming, I have to say this time it actually does work. It leaves you hungering. It's like one of those Saturday morning serials like Indiana Jones was based on. You know, they're on a train, it's runaway, and then you can almost see the screen freezing and the voiceover coming on. Hopefully it's not Stephen King's speaking voice, because, it's an acquired taste, but will our heroes survive? Will crazy Blaine the Mono plummet them to their death, and or will they live to fight another day? Tune in next time as we pick up our story of the Dark Tower. I knew it was coming. I did not. I did not mind it at all. So what was very, very annoying, and what must have been just infuriating to people back 30 plus years ago when the book came out, I didn't mind. I didn't mind one bit. So what doesn't work? These videos are just chock full of spoilers. By this point, you must know this, but the the kind of reverse rape, or the rape scene that occurs in the mud with Susanna slash Detta while they're trying to get Jake back into Midworld, it does prove to be of absolute vital importance to the series. And the way that Stephen King sort of makes all of that happen, the plot device, it's mind-boggling. It's kind of insane. It's funny. It's like it's so over the top. It's so bizarre, but the actual scene of, I don't know, maybe that I didn't remember that at all from my first read through, but now it really stood out to me as just being painful and kind of ugly. I don't feel like Stephen King glorifies it. He doesn't dwell on it more than he needs to. It was just kind of, at this point in my life, it was just off-putting. I don't feel like it could have, like, that plot device has to happen in the overall arching series, but perhaps it didn't need to be drawn out as much in the novel. I don't know. I don't know. It definitely didn't make me stop reading the novel, and um, but it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way this time around. I didn't remember it at all the first time, so who knows? Who knows what that says about me in my younger iteration. So yeah. Anyway, what doesn't work? Demon rape. It's overall it's a much shorter list than the things that I really enjoyed this time around, and while I have sold my first editions, I have kept these plume paperbacks because they include the original artwork. These are not very. Um, there's Jake with Gasher in the City of Lud. Now that is one kind of nasty character right there. But these are not hard to find. They're not expensive. They're not valuable, but they are really nice. And if you want to have physical copies of the books, one of the main selling points, one of the main draws is the artwork, and the Plume trade paperbacks include all of the original artwork, which is really nice. Anyway, there's the hideous, abominable monster things that live in the wastelands outside of the City of Lud. But anyway, long story, even longer, just a little bit longer. The Wastelands was a delight. It was my first. So the Gunslinger I liked a lot more this time around. I feel like I knew what to expect more, and maybe that knowing what to expect really helps, because every deviation from the actual journey of getting to the Dark Tower kind of annoyed me the first time around, but this time I'm very much luxuriating in the and savoring the journey itself. So the Wastelands, like I said, I'm almost done with book 6, and the Wastelands definitely rises in my estimation and my esteem within the series and within Stephen King's works as a whole. So I am I'm very grateful for you for coming along on this journey with me. Let me know your thoughts about the Wastelands. Put them in the comments. Is it one of your favorites? Is it annoying? Does the cliffhanger just like totally leave you cold? Um, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts about this work that I'm now seeing in in a completely different way than I used to, which is just really kind of a beautiful thing. Um, let me know, because I care about what you have to say, and I want to thank you for your time and for your support of the channel. Um, I know that I'm a huge Stephen King nerd, but I've come to find out there's a whole lot of us out there, and we're pretty okay people in terms as far as nerds go. So thank you for being part of this and for your support. And wherever you are, I hope you take care of yourself and have a great rest of your day. Talk to you later. Bye.